Well, good evening again, my dear friends, and before the video starts tonight, I just want to give you a quick reminder that I am now partnered with several other narrators to help build Chilling, the brand new home for scary stories. Chilling's a revolutionary mobile app that allows you to customize your listening experience in ways that YouTube never can. Now, before you go and download and start your free trial, I just want to share a little bit with you about what Chilling has to offer. There are simply hundreds and hundreds of amazing stories, terrifying true stories, and different categories of horrifying fiction. Basically, there's a little something for everyone. And even though there are pre-generated playlists, you also have the ability to mark stories as your favorites, mix and match individual stories to create your own customized playlists, something you can't do on YouTube so easily. And of course, one of the most exciting things about Chilling is the first of its kind ambient sound menu. That's right, you can select and change the background noise of the story. So, you can start a story off sitting by the crackling campfire, and by the end find yourself stuck in a rainstorm. The Chilling app even has a sleep timer, so you can let those stories lull you into those sweet, sweet nightmares. Now, Chilling is constantly adding new features, and you can even download stories now for listening offline. But let's talk about the best part of Chilling now. It's completely ad-free, that's right, no adverts whatsoever. You can listen to hours of stories with no interruptions. Yeah, so what are you waiting for? Download now and start your free trial today. Go to the App Store and search for Chilling, or simply click in the link in the description below. It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. The Werewitch of the Howling Woods. After several days and hundreds of miles traveling by stagecoach, Thorogood had finally arrived at his long-dreaded destination of Fog's Dwelling. It was a drab, inauspicious little frontier town built upon the very edges of the Howling Woods, a fabled old-growth forest that had stood as the northernmost border of the realm for time immemorial. Thorogood was awed by his first sight of that mythically primeval forest, as it was comprised of some of the tallest pine trees known to exist. They seemed as tall as the hills themselves, reaching up towards the clouds, and they'd grown together so tightly that, from a distance at least, they appeared to have formed a nigh impenetrable border between the civilized realm of Whitaker and the primeval savagery beyond. It was a border that the folk of Fog's Dwelling had dared to challenge, though, or rather the Grand Priestess had dared to challenge it, and the poor folk she sent to settle the region had not dared to challenge her. The Howling Woods were too rich with timber to be ignored any longer, especially when the oracles had divined that the revenants of the Forsaken Coasts were growing in number. A great fleet of warships was required to deter and defend against any potential invasion from the east. Funny how the prophecies of the oracles always seemed to support the Grand Priestess's agenda, Thorogood mused. As a result of the dangers posed by the ancient forest, Fog's Dwelling was built more like a military fort than a town, with the entire perimeter encircled by a wall of thick logs with sharpened ends. A gallery ran the entire circumference of the interior, so that guards could keep watch, though at night all they could hope to see was the eyeshine of lurking predators. The only way in was a dual set of reinforced gates that faced away from the forest and towards the wide stretch of empty moorland that separated them from the rest of the realm. Those gates had only opened for Thorogood's stagecoach after the guards had confirmed an all clear, and had slammed shut the instant they were through. The town itself lacked any stone buildings at all, with everything being made entirely of wood from the forest. Thorogood supposed that made sense, since they would have had a surplus of the latter and a near-total deficit of the former. It did seem a fire hazard, though, especially since they were clustered so tightly together, but presumably the cold and damp climate helped with that. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in front of the Foggy Lantern Tavern, where Thorogood would be lodging during his stay in Fog's Dwelling. He tipped the porter and bid his farewell to the coachman as he headed inside the tavern, hoping that his contact was waiting for him inside, as he'd promised. His entrance into the tavern didn't go unnoticed. dressed in a brocade frock coat and a silk cravat, his fair blonde hair tied back in a ponytail with a satin ribbon. He stood out like an unhammered nail amidst the rustic, working-class patrons. "Thorogood," a deep voice called out to him from the back corner of the room. Sitting there was a tall, broad-shouldered, barrel-chested man with a thick black beard. "Ah, yes, hello. I am Royal Scholar Adedius Thorogood of Evanhoe, here on behalf of Her Eminence's Hallowed Society for Thaumaturgy, Alchemy, and Natural Philosophy. You must be Mr. Faxton. Delighted to make your acquaintance," Thorogood said cordially, greeting him with a curt bow. Rather than get up from his seat and return the bow, Faxton stuck out his hand. Thorogood hesitated for just a moment, but considering this assignment required Faxton's cooperation, not to mention his significant size advantage, Thorogood capitulated and shook the man's hand. "Have a seat, young man," Faxton said, his gruff voice making it sound more like an order than an invitation. Thorogood complied once more, wiping his hand off with his handkerchief as discreetly as he could. The rickety table shook slightly as a barmaid plopped a wooden tankard of ale down in front of him. Thorogood noticed that the woman's bare arms were tattooed, and though he had only glanced at them briefly, he had thought that they looked thaumaturgical in nature. Magical tattoos on a servant girl would certainly have been unusual, and he attempted to call her back so that he could get a better look. Miss, could I actually get, whatever fancy wine you're hankering for, we ain't got it. We only got what we can brew, and this isn't exactly vineyard country. It's beer or nothing," Faxton informed him. Thorogood gave a resigned nod and took a reluctant sip of the ale, deciding to leave the mystery of the tattoos for later. "So you've come all the way out here just to get a look-see at a real-live lycanthrope up close, have you? Did I say that right? Lycanthrope? That's a fancy name you types call them, isn't it?" "Yes, that's correct, Mr. Faxton, but I'm fine with calling them turnskins or whatever else you prefer." Thorogood nodded. "As discussed in our letters, Her Eminence is increasingly concerned about the steady rise in lichen attacks along the frontier." She's concerned about her timber supply, and that's about it," Faxton scoffed. "We're pushing harder into their territory, and they're pushing back harder. Doesn't take a royal scholar to understand that, does it?" Yes, clearly the increase in the population along the frontier, as well as the expansion of the frontier deeper into the Howling woods, is a factor in the increase in lichen attacks, Thorogood conceded. But the frequency and number of these attacks are still excessive based on our prior surveys of the lycanthrope population. Her Eminence's main concern, one which I share, and the one which I have come to investigate, is that the lichens are breeding. Faxton let out a hard belly laugh, slapping his palm onto the table so hard it nearly toppled over, sending ale sloshing everywhere. "Breeding? And how would that work? The turnskins are all outlaws who ran off into the Howling woods," he said. "Well, Mr. Faxton, there are women outlaws, and seeing as how most of their male compatriots would hardly have been gentlemen even before being turned to literal wolves, mating seems an inevitability," Thorogood answered. "Mating, sure. I'll grant you that, but not breeding," Faxton said. "I may not be as learned as yourself, Mr. Thorogood, but I do know that you can't breed a mule. If a cross between a horse and a donkey is sterile, then surely a wolfman won't have to worry about feeding a litter of pups." Well, that's a valid observation, and it may well turn out to be the case. But if the lycanthropes are breeding, it's of the utmost importance that we uncover the truth, Thorogood insisted. He leaned in now so that he might speak a little quieter. A plague of lycanthropy has always been a terrifying possibility, if a remote one. Contagions that spread solely through the sharing of bodily fluids do so slowly, especially when the infected are unable to pass for uninfected. No one's ever caught lycanthropy from a courtesan, I can assure you. The shunning of lichens to the wilderness, or culling their numbers, has always been sufficient to control outbreaks. But if they are breeding, and passing on their lycanthropy to their offspring, and that presents a possibility for exponential population growth, and with it the capacity to utterly overwhelm our defenses. All of Whitaker could either be slaughtered or turned in an unspeakably short period of time. If they are breeding, then we must know and begin preparations for a full-on extermination immediately, before it's too late. Now, according to your letters, you've located a den, is that correct? It is, Paxton nodded. It's around 9 miles into the forest. They're nocturnal, so the woods are safe enough to travel by day. Sticking your head inside a lichen's den just to see if they've got a fresh litter still sounds like suicide to me. That it might be, but it's a risk I have to take to find the truth, Thorogood agreed, taking another slow, though clearly not savory, sip from his tankard. Now tell me, Mr. Faxton, if you know where their den is, why have you never tried to wipe them out? Faxton chuckled dismissively at the suggestion. Have you ever actually seen a turnskin, Mr. Thorogood? He asked. Well, there are taxidermized specimens in the hall of... So, no then. He cut him off. Well, me and everyone else in the town has seen them, usually far closer than we'd like to. You see them skulking in the trees, eyes glowing in the dark, waiting for us to let our guard down and pick one of us off. We hear them howling, sometimes from miles away, sometimes from right outside the town wall, on more than one occasion from inside them. They're bigger, faster, and stronger than any man, even me, and their hides are thick. Now, silver bullets work, but as a poison, it's a slow death, and they can still do quite a bit of damage before they keel over. If the entire town were to march to the den and take on the whole pack on their turf, it'd be a massacre. Even if we succeeded, it would be with half of us dead and half of the survivors turned, which the other half would then have to deal with. So what would be the bleeding point? When you fight a turnskin, you don't just risk death. You risk becoming a turnskin and perpetuating the cycle yourself, which is why we only ever fight them when we have to. The Grand Priestess is mad if she thinks that an extermination effort would have a chance in hell at working. We need to withdraw from the frontier altogether, treat the moors as a no-man's land, and the turnskins will be contained to the Howling woods just like they've always been. Which would be a perfectly viable option, were it not for our pressing need for timber, Thorogood reminded him. Faxton sighed in what would have seemed like resignation, were it not for the sudden look of pity in his eyes. Well, we'll see if you still feel that way after tomorrow, he said forebodingly. I suggest you turn in early, Mr. Thorogood. We set out for the den at first light. The next morning it was clear why Faxton had said first light and not sunrise, as the perpetually foggy and overcast weather rendered the sun little more than a myth. The grey damp fog was so thick Thorogood couldn't even see the tops of the trees, let alone the sky. Both men were dressed in long leather coats, tall boots, and wide-brimmed hats as they ventured beyond the relative safety of the town walls. Each carried a silver-tipped cutlass at their hips and a torch-topped walking stick in their hands. Multiple flintlocks loaded with silver bullets were slung upon their bandoliers, and Faxton had a large blunderbuss hoisted over his shoulder. Thorogood would have preferred a more sizable retinue for his escort, but even if he could have spared the gold, Fogg's dwelling couldn't spare the men. On such a dangerous frontier, a community needed every able body it had to ensure its survival, and they were already none too happy about Faxton having to risk his life just to satisfy the Grand Priestess's curiosity. Remember, stay alert. If any turnskins are prowling the Howling at this time of day, between the trees and the fog we'll hear them long before we see them. Faxton cautioned as they took their first steps across the tree line, officially leaving civilization behind them. The good news is they don't hunt men for food unless they're starving. If they see we're armed, they won't risk a confrontation without the advantage of numbers on their side. We shouldn't have to worry about that until we reach the den. Stay as quiet as you can, and whatever you do, don't leave my sight. If we get separated, it's 100 to 1 shot you'll find your way out before dark. Thorogood didn't doubt it. All the giant trees looked more or less the same to him, and the canopy would have made navigating by the sun or stars impossible, if the unyielding clouds hadn't done so already. The terrain at least was manageable enough, since the Howling Woods had very little undergrowth. The great pines had greedily kept all the sun, water, and soil for themselves, leaving precious little for anything else. A thick carpet of dead, brown needles was mostly all that covered the forest floor. It was also eerily quiet. They hadn't been walking for more than a quarter of an hour before the sheer silence of it had Thorogood thoroughly unsettled. "I must say, the forest is rather more desolate than I was expecting," he remarked. "Now, you say the lichens only eat men when they're starving. From what I've seen so far, that can't be that uncommon of an occurrence. There's elk and the like that feed on the tree bark, and anything that does manage to sprout up, and grazing beasts out on moors. Turnskins can easily travel over 100 miles a night in search of prey," Faxton informed him, not bothering to turn around. "And they're skilled hunters with keen senses, capable of picking up the slightest of trails or smelling prey from miles away. They know how to survive in their own woods, don't you, Fred?" "Well, you almost sound like you admire them," Thorogood remarked. "I respect them as apex predators. Yeah, we're the invaders here, looking to chop down their trees to make warships so that we can invade somewhere else. They're just trying to survive. You can't deny that they're very good at that," Faxton replied. "Well, you sounded far less respectful when we were discussing the prospect of taking on an entire pack of them," Thorogood reminded him. "Last night you made it sound like they were monsters." "Well, I was trying to scare you, hoping you'd realize what a fool's errand this was and head back to where you came from," Faxton told him. "Everything's a monster from something's point of view. These trees are monsters to the plants struggling to survive while they hoard most of the available resources. That doesn't make the trees evil, or mean they have no right to exist." "Well, enough talk. Footsteps might go ignored or unrecognized by the Turnskins, but our voices won't. Don't say anything unless it's of vital importance." Thorogood nodded, even though Faxton was facing away from him, and they made the rest of their trek in silence. It wasn't until they'd been hiking for nearly another 3 hours that the eerie and near absolute quiet was finally broken. A long, baleful howl pierced through the air, seeming to shake the floating droplets of fog as it did. Thorogood had heard wolf howls before, but this was obviously no wolf howl. It was deeper, more guttural and more resonant, like the creature that made it was significantly larger than a wolf. The howling was also coming from above them, and Thorogood had yet to meet a wolf that could climb a tree. He froze in his tracks as his heart nearly froze in his chest. He looked to Faxton for instruction, who held up a finger to urge him to remain silent. To Thorogood's utter dismay, Faxton then cupped his hands to his mouth and produced a howl of his own, a perfect mimic of the one that had come from the treetops. The fog-cloaked lichen let out a much shorter howl in response, and Thorogood heard it leaping through the canopied boughs away from them. "We can talk now. They know we're here. Talking won't make any difference," Faxton said. "Why aren't they attacking?" Thorogood demanded in a whispered tone that was too loud to actually be considered a whisper, fumbling to draw one of his pistols. "I told you, they only eat men when they're starving. They won't attack unless they think we're a threat, so put that damn thing away," Faxton ordered. "All right, the den's dead ahead. Keep your voice calm and low and don't make any sudden threatening movements." Thorogood didn't need Faxton's woodcraft to tell him they were close to the den. Bones of various creatures were strewn about the forest floor, all of them picked clean of flesh, with the larger ones broken and sucked dry of marrow. The bark of the trees had been furiously scratched in some sort of territorial display, and the smell of death hung heavily in the air. As they marched forward, shapes began appearing in the fog, far too small to be pine trees, but at the same time far too large to be lichens. Peering harder into the mist, he saw that they were monoliths. Ancient monoliths, weather-worn and moss-covered, with deep, curvilinear runes etched into them. They were 12 feet tall, semi-ellipsoid in shape, and had hexagonal holes chiseled into the top ends. They formed a ring 100 feet across, and the ground within was a shallow depression 12 feet deep. In the center of the ring was a large hexagonal stone slab, one that looked suspiciously like a sacrificial altar. "What the bloody hell is this?" Thorogood demanded as he grabbed Faxton by the arm. "It's the den, see?" He pointed to the opposite end of the pit, where a wide tunnel had been dug into the ground, framed with branches and large stones. "The den is inside of an ancient Ophionic megalith that's inexplicably in the middle of the Howling Woods. You didn't think that was worth mentioning?" Thorogood cried. "Oh, I didn't, honestly. It's an old country. Ruins all over the place. Some are bound to have squatters." Faxton shrugged. "So, now that you see it for yourself, what's the plan?" "I'm afraid I haven't been entirely forthright with you, Mr. Faxton." Thorogood sighed as he unslung his rucksack. "Obviously, no one in their right mind would expect to be able to walk into a den full of live lichens and survive. And that's why I brought this." He carefully unwrapped a small ceramic grenade with a silvery wick sticking out of the top. "This is filled with a solution of silver nitrate. When it explodes, the solution will instantly vaporize into a gas that will be highly toxic to lichens, especially when they're all confined to their den like that. The gas will immediately get into their eyes, nose, and throats, causing incapacitating pain, occluded vision and smell, impaired breathing, and eventually suffocation. Once they're dead, we survey the bodies and ideally drag one back with us if we can manage it." Faxton stoically glowered down at the small explosive, his expression cold and stern, but otherwise unreadable. So, that's the priestess's plan for exterminating the Turnskins then, is it?" he asked. "Find their dens and then gas them to death in their sleep." "Oh, you said it yourself, Faxton. Any sort of honorable warfare favors the lichens. Those they don't kill, they turn. What choice do we have?" "Well, to leave them be," Faxton replied quietly. "If that's what you came here to do, then get on with it. I'll watch your ass from up here, but that's it. I'm not doing the priestess's dirty work." Thorogood nodded understandingly and made his descent into the stone ring. Once he was down, he first lit the torch on top of his walking stick, and then very cautiously approached the den. Unlike the surrounding area, the circle itself had been kept meticulously clean, almost as if the lichens had some conception of its sanctity. Thorogood quickly dismissed the notion, deciding that they simply had some instinctual drive to keep the den entrance clean of anything that might attract scavengers. He came to a complete stop when he reached the den's entrance, peering into it in a vain attempt to try to get a sense of its internal dimensions. The entrance was a black abyss, though, and Thorogood had no way of knowing how deep in the lichens were, or even if there were multiple tunnels. It was possible that just tossing the grenade into the den wouldn't be enough to kill all of them. If he tried going in himself, though, he would almost certainly be ambushed and killed before he ever had a chance to light it. Accepting it as the least risky option, Thorogood lit the grenade and threw it as hard as he could into the den. To his surprise, he heard it shatter against something solid before igniting. The plumes of smoke rising out of the entrance proved that the den couldn't have been very deep. And yet he didn't hear a single lichen howling in pain, nor did any of them come running out of the den. Perplexed, he cautiously moved through the thinning smoke and dared to enter the den, holding his torch as far out from him as he could. He hadn't gone more than a few steps when he saw what the grenade had smashed into. It was a door, a wide wooden door clearly made from the pine trees that surrounded them, but undeniably much younger than the stone circle above them. He tried to open it, but found it was barred from the other side. "Faxton!" Thorogood shouted as he ran back into the stone circle. "Mr. Faxton, there appears to be some sort of a... But he trailed off, his attention suddenly stolen by the sight of over a dozen lichens standing around the perimeter of the circle staring down at him. They were nearly 7 feet tall when they stood to their full height, though many of them were hunched, stooped, or crouched on all fours. They were lean and muscular, with unretractable claws on digitigrade feet and long, splayed hands. Their dark, coarse fur was black, brown, grey, and even auburn, and their hungry eyes shone either red, gold, or green. Their snouts were short, and their teeth were long, longer and sharper than that of any natural creature that dwelt in these woods. Thorogood turned, and standing over the den's entrance, where he'd emerged, there was a woman with a wild mane of swept-back raven hair, and the same amber eyes that some of the lichens had. Her sun-browned skin was covered in dark green tattoos that mimicked the curvilinear runes of the megalith. And Thorogood realized those were the same tattoos he'd seen on the barmaid the previous night. She was naked, save for a golden talisman around her neck, bearing the triple crescent moon icon of the Covenant. She was also filthy, with hips that were so wide and breasts that were so large and pendulous they looked more like they belonged on some ancient fertility idol than a living woman. Her lips twisted upwards in a snarl, bearing an inhuman set of carnivorous teeth. She had a lichen knelt to either side of her, and she rested her hands upon their heads as if they were common dogs. The scene was so horrifying and so surreal, he didn't notice Faxton standing beside them until he spoke. "I'm afraid I wasn't entirely forthright with you either, Mr. Thorogood," he said, his blunderbuss at the ready to put Thorogood down in an instant, should he have the need. "What the bloody hell is this?" Thorogood demanded. "And who is she?" "My name is Lymestra, and I am the den mother to this pack of lichens," she said in a voice that had an unnatural yet feral timbre to it. "Before that I was a witch, so I guess that makes me a werewitch then, doesn't it?" "No. Were means man. A werewitch would be a warlock," Thorogood said sardonically. If he was going to die, he might as well die correcting people's etymological errors. "What the devil do you mean, den mother?" "I was banished from the sisterhood for my numerous unorthodoxies, and, like many outcasts, I fled to the Howling woods to escape the law," she replied, listlessly scratching her Rubenesque belly with her wolf-like claws. "I knew I couldn't survive for long on my own, so I used my talents at theriomancy to persuade a pack of lichens to take me in. When my sisters rejected me, these creatures took me in as one of their own. I knew that it would be only a matter of time before I became infected myself, and not wanting to completely lose my human facilities, I set to work designating these." She gestured to the thaumaturgical tattoos that covered much of her body. "These let me shift between forms at will, and while I admit I'm certainly a little more primal than I used to be, I'm still by far the smartest lycanthrope in these woods. With the mind of a woman, the magic of a witch, and now the strength of a lichen, this forest is my domain. When the Grand Priestess sent your people to invade my woods, my first impulse was to destroy them. However, as I spied upon them from the woods and plotted my next move, I realized that they too were outcasts and hated the Grand Priestess as much as I did. They weren't invaders. They were refugees. And so I decided to be a magnanimous queen and extend an offer of amnesty instead." "Amnesty?" Thorogood asked. "Her tattoos. She taught us how to make them. Let us keep our human minds in human forms, but able to change skins when need be," Faxton explained. "Fog's dwelling and all its people now recognize Lymestra as our sovereign, and we don't hesitate to use the gift she's given us to defend her woods. Any invaders who surrender can either retreat or receive the ink themselves, but those who don't will either be slaughtered or join our ranks as traditional wolf-minded lichens. And if the Grand Priestess still won't relent, then I'll send my people to covertly spread lycanthropy throughout her realm and bring it down from the inside, returning all of Whitaker to a state of primeval nature," Lymestra added. "And you, Mr. Thorogood, who came here to cowardly murder us in our sleep, you will now join our pack without the benefit of my tattoos, to make up for your treachery. Well, if you survive the transformation, of course." Some of the lichens began growling and slowly crawled down into the ring. Thorogood pulled out a pistol and tried to shoot, only to find that Faxton hadn't loaded his guns. "It didn't have to be this way, Thorogood," Faxton lamented. "You could have walked away." Thorogood didn't seem to be feeling especially repentant, however, refusing to forsake the cause he had sworn his life to. The guns may have been useless, but the cutlass was real. Throwing his walking stick to the ground and drawing his sword, he charged for the Lycans standing ahead of him, ready to strike them down with his silver blade. He never got the chance, though, as he was pounced on from behind and knocked to the ground, the lycanthrope wasting no time in digging its teeth into his shoulder. As he screamed in pain, the entire pack howled in celebration of his infection. People always come around to ask the same questions, wanting to understand something about the missing Shreveport girl. Some kind of fools always want a new angle, a new lead. But no matter how many times you tell people the story, that's all it remains to people. And it should be something more. But people are not listening for a warning, right? You want to know about her. They want to know about the River Witch, eh? Alright, if you feel you need to know, then I guess you need to know. It's a funny thing how knowing such things and believe in such things don't always go hand in hand. Now, I'll tell you all I know and all I believe, but no matter what you end up thinking or believing, know that it won't change a thing. She's real. Damn real. Well, where to start this thing? Yeah, the dip. It was at the restaurant. That's where I first saw her. That's where she met the devil. The restaurant was just so in name, you see. Nothing more than a shanty open bar near the riverside where good old boys stop in for some good home-cooked meals. The place was always crowded with the trucks and boats on either side. An old lady by the name of Nina worked it with her 2 sons, Ray and Thomas. They called it the Midnight Dip. It was over in southern Plaquemines Parish. It was a happy place. Good food, good people, good times. Yeah, it had its share of fights or incidents, but nothing more than dumb drunks or angry wives looking for their man. Good times. Well, getting back to it. It happened in July, roughly 2 years ago. Madison, one of the new fellows working on the pipeline, he came by with his wife-to-be. Myra was her name. Nice girl. Come out of Shreveport, if I remember correctly. Well, she took sweet on Madison since he wasn't from around the local parts. Come from up north, Montana, you see. Anyhow, when the pipeline was brought down through these parts, she left Shreveport and moved to New Orleans to be closer. She'd come down on every other weekend to spend time with him. A real sweet thing they had. It was what my mother would have called a glass romance, though. Wasn't long to last under any kind of pressure. The smell of barbecue was strong in the air that evening. The stars were shining sweet and the gumbo was just about done. Cold beers sit in the cooler. Yeah, it was to be a good night. A normal night. Some of the boys were going to launch a few fireworks of their own on the far side of the riverbank. Going to be a hell of a show, I thought. Drunks and fireworks, you know. Well, it was about 9 or so, and the fresh catfish was just coming off the grill. We had a dartboard getting set up on the side of a tree. Went to throw the first round when I got a rude interruption. There was a woman's scream cutting over all the noise of the night. It scared the hell out of me, I'll tell you. It sounded something painful. And turns out, it was. See, that sweet girl Myra gone to the truck to get something or other and found the Madison fella getting real intimate with a local bush named Jesse. Well, they broke her heart on the spot. Poor thing. She ran right down onto the road, into the dark. Madison ran down after her, spouting a heap of lies about how his carnal intentions with another woman wasn't what it seemed, all the while struggling to get his pants back on. Soon he was lost into the darkness of the road, too. Madison came back around an hour later and got his truck. Didn't say anything, just got the truck and left. Well, another hour or so passes and he comes on down again to get a beer. Nina wouldn't serve him because he took a nasty lip with her. Not that he needed it. I mean, the man came in smelling like race car fuel. He jumped in his truck and passed out before he even got the keys in. Much for the better, we thought. No need driving that drunk around here. Could end up in the river, dark waters. Nothing would find you there. Oh, nothing good, anyways. Around the tip of 1 a.m., Nina and her boys started getting the place cleaned up and ready for clothes. Lights were going off and plates were going up. Remember finishing off my bit of beer and fish as we got ready to leave. Left my tip, got my stuff for the boat ride home with my buddy Red. As I walked outside, I saw something staggering just out of the corner of my eye down the road. It was a dirty, sloppy mess of rags. The damn thing looked like it had just walked right up out of the river. Mud and moss all over. As it got a bit closer, I saw it was that Myra girl. Oh, what a nasty mess she was. I tell you, it was like she'd walked through mud, sewage, and a jungle all at once. Well, I ran over to her as best as a liquored-up old man could. I called out to Nina and Red. The two boys, Ray and Thomas, came first. They saw how she was and picked her up and brought her inside into the cabin. Nina brought out some warm towels and a clean blanket. Red and I just sat at the bar and watched, doing our best to stay out of the way. Yeah, it was damn near frozen from what they said. Took about a good 20 minutes or so, but they got her warmed up and covered. She wasn't saying a word at first, but Nina got her talking a little bit, and then a lot. A lot of it was cursing, mind you, mainly about that Madison fella. When she calmed down again, she told Nina something horrid. Oh, she started crying again, softer this time. She started telling Nina about how she was walking down the road. Madison came up on behind her, started to gag her and beat her. It's hard to make out through the tears, but well, I think she said that Jessie girl was with him. Yeah, she said that after the beating, Madison dragged her by the hair to someplace cold and wet. Someplace evil. She actually said the word evil. Well, back then I didn't know how you could tell that someplace was evil, though we all learned fast soon enough. She said she couldn't remember more than that. After that, she just broke down again, inside this time. You could just know it by looking at her. Ah, poor thing just sat there looking like a half-drowned cat. Remember Nina was cussing up a bit under her breath now. She went on about how she never liked that Madison man, and that she should have buckshot his rear the moment he walked up to the dip. Oh, I hate to be the guy who gets in another man's life, but if the girl was telling the truth, then Madison was a real deal scumbag who broke a pretty girl. Anyway, Red came back in and told me he'd call Sheriff Hornings. I got up to tell Nina that Red and I were heading out, as it was late and all, but I got off the bar stool. I saw Myra get up too. Well, it caught me off guard as it was so quick. I tell you, that girl's legs didn't push her up. It was like she was yanked up off of the floor. She started walking out right away, walking with a purpose. I called out to her and she paid no attention. She just kept walking. One of Nina's boys, Ray, taking sweet on the girl and tried to see what was going on. Well, she ignored him too. When he tried to hold her hand, he pulled it back quick like something burned or shocked him. He fell to the ground with a cry of pain as he cradled his hand. She opened the back door and sat outside in the tall grass by the riverbank. She just sat there and didn't move or say anything. Damn, it was just creepy. I remember we took a look at Ray's hand, and it was red hot. His mama was putting an ice pack on it while his brother helped. Red was looking over and said he saw bite marks on the hand. Nina put Ray's hand to the light and noticed that he sure did have 2 small bite marks on him. Nina checked it out, and sure enough, there was something on him. It kind of looked like a weird snake bite. Just the fangs were too far apart, and there seemed to be 2 sets of them. Ray started to run hot water all over and said he felt sick. He said that his head was killing him. Thomas had asked me to get the first aid kit from the back of the bar. Well, I'd been there enough years to need it once or twice myself, so I knew my way around. As I poked on back behind the bar, I saw Myra, still sitting in the tall grass. She had her head tilted up, talking to someone. Couldn't see who, though. Well, I tossed the kid over to Red and stepped out back again. And that's when I saw him. He was tall, a good 8 foot on him at least. He stood there in the tall grass talking to Myra. I did my best to put him together in my eyes. It was almost like my mind couldn't keep him in direct sight. It was like looking at a moving ink spot. It was all dark and wispy-like. I tell you, I know it's hard to believe, considering the drinking, but I tell you, I knew that what I was looking at wasn't something men were supposed to see. Not rightly, anyways. It was a deep feeling. Something inside was telling me to get away, to close my eyes. I don't know if it was instincts or something else, but I could feel the danger, and maybe even the evil. As I watched Myra talking to the thing, it raised its arm, I think, and wrapped her whole head in that same inky cloud, lifted her straight up. I thought it was choking her to death. I called out to her, at least I tried. You see, before I even opened my mouth, I was dropped to the mud with a brutal force. I couldn't move a muscle, couldn't even scream. I could hear the commotion inside the dip. They were helping young Ray with his arm. Nina was yelling, cursing, crying all the same time. Thomas was doing his best to help his brother and mother deal. From what I gathered, Ray had started going pale and cold. Red was yelling at me. He was asking me to come back inside. I wanted to say something, but it was useless. I was pinned down. Well, I don't rightly know what happened, but I was sure that the devil thing outside had somehow done it to me. Managed to move my head a bit, and then just a bit more. Little by little, I was able to move again. As I finally managed to stand, I looked for the girl and that thing. I was equal parts relieved and terrified to not see either of them. I stumbled my way back into the restaurant and stared at Red for a solid minute or so while he asked me what was wrong. I couldn't say a word. I didn't know how to begin. My own internal debates as to what to say were cut short by an ugly, grinding sound booming outside. Red went out back first, and he could hear them letting loose all sorts of curses. A horrible, deep wailing started to come from outside now. Thomas and Nina stayed focused on Ray, but the screaming was getting to them. This was a man's scream, a terrified scream. Well, I thought it was Red at first, but he came back in with a face as pale as poor Ray's. He gave me one deep look, and I knew that he'd seen the devil outside as I had. Well, don't know what made me do it. Maybe part stupid or just curious. I took a few steps toward the door. Red looked at me with a look that was pleading me not to go outside. He may even have been saying it too. I couldn't tell. I opened the door and saw a damn horrible sight. You see, in all the commotion, we'd forgotten about that bastard Madison. He was still outside, passed out in the truck. When I saw him, though, he was wide up, sober, and terrified. Myra had him. Now you can all judge and spit in my story, but I tell you, that's what I saw. It just still seems so out of reach. Yet it was real. I know it. Myra was there with a nasty look in her eyes. It was a mix of a hungry gator and a scared deer. Well, that's the best I can describe it. Totally inhuman, really. She was still wearing the heavy blanket that Nina had draped over her. With one arm on the grill of the truck and feet digging into the mud, she was pulling Madison towards the river. Madison was trying his damnedest to break the windows or open the doors. Nothing worked. That same black garbage that I saw earlier, it was swimming all over the truck. He screamed, he cussed, he cried like a little kid. I could do nothing but watch. I knew that Madison was going to have something bad happen to him, no matter what I did. Well, I tell you, I looked at Myra, and she seemed to be dripping with that blackness all over. It was that devil stuff. It was coming out of her ears, her eyes, her mouth, and her nose. It was covering the truck with more and more. Oh, that little Myra, she pulled the whole truck from the lot to the river without breaking stride. Myra, whatever it was inside her. The devil, I say. It had to be. And when I stared at her too long, she started to break up in my eyes. Just the devil thing before me. She wasn't part of the world anymore. No, she was lost. I just knew that somehow. She got to the edge of the river. She let go of the truck. His front wheels were already in the water. She stepped back to the side and screamed out some crazy noise. Oh, it hurt all over just to hear it. I can't help but imagine it's what being inside a microwave must feel like. My head, arms, legs, all of it felt like they were about to pop and burn. It was over quickly, though. Then she fell to the floor and started puking up gallons of that evil black stuff. I heard Madison calling out, crying for help. He'd finally broken a piece of the windshield and got his foot stuck. God, it was like watching a rabid dog in a kennel. Then I heard the wailing noise again. The blackness swirling around the truck stopped and seemed to pour to the ground like water. It was dark out, and the stuff itself was darker than anything, but I tell you, I watched it drain all to the river. Myra was still just sitting there bent over by the riverbank. More and more of that stuff just kept coming out of her. God, it was coming out like a dam had broken inside of her. And the wailing noise came back for a moment, and then faded. You could hear Madison calling out to Myra to help him. He was going on about how much he loved her, oh, and how she needed him. How he could help her and comfort her. And if she heard him, she didn't show any reaction at all. There was a big splash in the river. Madison noticed it too. He stopped his noise and looked straight ahead. It felt like hours had gone by while we stared at that river. And then it came out. The thing that finally killed Madison. It was a hand. Massive, though. It seemed to be made out of twigs, logs, mud, and rock. It was twice the size of the truck. Oh, I tell you, it was like the skeleton of the river. Damn crazy it was. It clawed its way to the shore, and I could make out a long, nasty arm of sorts, trailing behind it. Well, Madison started to scream again, but not for long. The monstrosity of a hand reached the truck and grabbed it whole. I could see more of that black ink dripping from it. It happened so quickly, I couldn't even really believe what I was watching. It crushed the truck like a can. No way I could see Madison now. But I knew the man was dead. If he wasn't, then I hoped he'd die soon, out of mercy. And the hand sank back into the river water as quickly as it had come. Myra was still there, bent over the riverbank. And I'm not ashamed to say that I went nowhere near her. I'd seen enough to know that whatever she was dealing with wasn't for God-fearing men to interfere with. I kept watching her, though. She didn't move one bit. I kept watching her, though. She didn't move one bit. She had a stillness that was just so unnatural. Nothing about her moved, not even her hair. And just about that point, a strong wind was picking up. Now let me tell you, this was a whole other thing, this wind. Red was outside with me now. Didn't know how long he'd been at my side. I looked at him and saw he could tell this wind was something really bad, though. Really bad. A strange kind of bad. I could feel it. Not like a gust of cold wind across your face, but inside me. Oh, it was ugly, nasty stuff. It chilled me from the inside out. When it hit the river's edge, I saw it take form, or something like a form. I don't know exactly what it was I saw, but I felt like it watched me. These strange eyes kind of peering out from the dark. Yeah, I know it's hard to imagine, so it's even harder to talk about, but it was there, watching. Almost like a snake's eyes, I thought. It was just so hard to look at. It pulled more and more of that blackness to the river edge and started to suck it down into the water. Soon there was none of that stuff left on the muddy banks. As whatever it was started to put itself to the waters, I saw Myra start to crack and crumble. Like dust in the wind. I'm telling you, it was surreal. It was nothing but a few seconds, and then she was gone. Nothing left of her. And then it was quiet again. No noise at all. Red damn near killed me when he put his hand on my back. My heart felt like it was stopping right there. I caught Thomas peeking through the back room windows, too. They both had the look that I must have been wearing. That look that says, we're not alone and we are afraid. I forced my legs to take me inside. Poor Nina. She sat there with her boy, Ray. I could tell by his face that he was gone. Glassy eyes and all. She cried about him for a good old while. Well, as any mother would. When the sheriff showed up, we had nothing to tell him. We all just sat there staring at each other. Well, the sheriff, he knew something that was up, but left it as a lover's quarrel and left. He said that if Myra or Madison showed up, to bring them by the station. We all nodded, knowing well that we would never see that girl's face again. Or rather, we hoped we never would. He did his best to talk to Nina, but with her son dead on the floor, she had nothing to say. We told him he got a snake bite, best we could tell. Harrison looked at us, and he could tell another story was sitting there, but he let it be. Red and I decided to walk home that night instead of taking the river. I myself have never been back on the water since. Can't even eat fish now, you know. Nina cried herself to death about a month after. Oh, poor lady just couldn't cope with any of it. Thomas still runs the dip, but nobody much goes there now. The whole area has kind of taken a negative dive. Since that night, other people have said that they've seen some really crazy things down on the river. I used to brush them off, but now I take notes. I know better than to ignore all the stories. And yet I also know well enough to leave them alone, too. As for that Jessie girl, no one has seen or heard from her since. She used to have a little place on the edge of the river. Well, it was not a surprise that no one can find the trailer anymore. Just a dirt lot where it used to be. Well, some say she moved, but being that close to the water, I just don't know. I don't really have much else to tell you about that night. I recommend that you keep your mind open for what can be out there. Oh, and you try and get more out of my story than just a laugh at an old drunk. Farewell, friend. And remember, stay clear of the river. There are worse things than gators in those waters. Oh, one more thing. Pay the tab for me if you would. This story was related to me by a veteran of the Second World War. Names have been changed for legal reasons, but the story I'm about to present is, at least to the man telling me this, accurate and true. I met him in a retirement home for veterans as part of a community service order. I was to go and help out any way I could, to work off the 200 hours I was supposed to complete. I met him about 40 hours into my service. The lady who worked there asked me to keep him company, as his best friend from the war had passed on 2 weeks prior, and he was keeping to himself. She thought, since I was liked around the place by the others, he might take a liking to me and open up a bit. I agreed and went over to him. For the first 2 hours or so, I tried to get him to talk, but he just sat there looking out the window, like he was lost in thought. I talked about different things, but he just didn't seem to care. I asked him about the war, and he just kept looking out of that window. I was going to give up when I decided to try one last thing. I told him my grandfather was also a veteran, but he'd fought in Korea. He seemed to stir at this, so I kept going. Told him he was wounded trying to take a hill he was ordered to capture. A medic had saved his life. After that, he was shipped back home and swore off war. The old vet looked at me and gave me a slight smile. And then he spoke. Your granddad was a smart man. I swore off war when I finally got home. But I'm going to let you in on something. You can swear off war, but you never really let it go. He then talked all the time after that. He told me of those days back then and how much time had changed. He talked about women he'd loved and lost, the struggles and benefits of a post-war life, what it was like during the Cold War, and so on. One thing I noticed was his reluctance to talk about the war itself that he'd fought in. I mentioned it a couple of times, but he always said, maybe one day. This went on till my last week of community service. The final day, we sat down as usual in his favorite spot by the window. He told me he was sad I'd be going and that he'd enjoyed his time talking with me. Then he said he wanted to tell me one last story before I left. He had never told anyone outside who was there that day this story, not even his late wife. He said whether I believed it or not was up to me. I was interested and listened up. He took a drink from his mug, cleared his throat, and started to spin me his tale. I was part of the landing team that hit Omaha Beach that fateful day in June. The airborne guys took off first ahead of us earlier and landed in the early hours that morning. The ship ride over was tense. Feelings all around were of fear and anxiousness. But we were a proud bunch, and we weren't going to let something like death get in our way. At least, that's what we told ourselves. That morning, the first wave of men hit the beach. It was an intense situation. I was part of the third wave that assaulted the beach, and by then, we were starting to gain a foothold and start to move our way into the bluffs themselves. The fighting had been raging on for a few hours by that point. I made my way to the other troops at the sand wall that separated us from them. We eventually broke through and took the bluffs, then were ordered inland to make a perimeter to repel any counterattack that Krauts might throw at us to retake the bluffs. Half the day in, and we'd established a beachhead. I was lucky to survive that day. It was also my first time killing another human being. Wouldn't be my last. I stayed on that beach for the next week. During that time I was sent on small patrols to make sure Fritz wasn't sneaking up on us. On the 14th day, I was summoned by a captain to be part of a 9-man team to go check out an abandoned cemetery reported to have enemy activity. Locals that were fleeing the area had reported seeing a small German squad holed up at the cemetery about 9 miles west of our beachhead. The cemetery was just that, a cemetery out in the middle of nowhere. There was no sounding village within miles of that cemetery. The captain's orders were to go and clear out that squad. He then assembled a team. Besides myself and the captain, there was Johnny Tudor, a rifleman, Rizzo Caprice, a rifleman, Donald Watlick, our radio man, Michael Espinosa, our BAR man, Eugene Cardinal, a rifleman, Tony LaRouche, a rifleman, and last was René Ledupre, another rifleman. This made up our Nazi hunting squad. Tudor and Cardinal were from Tennessee, living in the same small town. Caprice, LaRouche, and Espinosa all trained together in boot camp, and all ended up in the same company, same unit, and now the same squad. Watlick was pulled to serve as our radio man. He also spoke French and German. None of us had known him before then. The captain's origins were a mystery to us all. Then there was the Cajun, one René Ledupre. He was the most queer out of all of us. He and I were in the same Higgins when we landed. We both took out a machine gun team and were together when we held a line from a possible German reinforcement. He was, all in all, a good soldier. We were to take only weapons and ammo. Anything that we didn't need was left. We were to be light as the captain, whose name was Howard Wright, wanted to attack quick and swift. We were to set out just before dawn and use the cover of darkness. At least, that was the plan. There was a full moon out that night, so we tried to stick to the shadows as much as possible. We were to reach our destination in around a few hours, but had long pauses along the way. Sometimes we thought we heard movement. Most of the time it ended up being a sheep or a cow. About an hour in, and Johnny started speaking first. "The moon makes things look eerie out here," he said. "What's the matter, Johnny? You spooked?" Michael chimed in. "Not really. Well," Johnny started before he paused. I could tell he looked a little nervous in the moon's glow. "You all remember that movie where that man turns into a wolf?" "Yep, I do," René answered. "What about it?" "Well, that movie scared me a bit. I was 16 when I saw it, and it stuck with me. When the moon's full, I get spooked a bit." Everyone but the captain laughed at that. "So, let me get this straight," I said. "You have no fear of a man with a rifle trying to kill you, but you have a fear of this made-up movie monster?" "No, that's not it," Johnny said in reply. "I don't want to die. Hell, dying out here scares me greatly. It's just, that movie. It spooked me, that's all." "That monster isn't made up," René said. "It's a real thing, at least where I'm from." An awkward silence fell on us. "What do you mean?" Johnny finally said. "My mama used to tell us stories about them growing up," René replied. She used to tell us not to wander too far in the woods or near the swamps, or the loup-garou would get us. What's a loup-garou? Johnny asked. It's the Creole word for werewolf. It's a man that can transform into a wolf. A wolfman, if you will. Mama used to tell us about her encounters with a few growing up herself. It's not like in the movies. They don't just turn because of the full moon, though it does influence them a lot more to come during that time. No, Mama said they can turn whenever. Those that are more attuned to it can control when and where they become one, but it can also trigger during extreme distress. Like, what kind of distress? I butted in, completely drawn into Renee's story. Well, Mama said one time when she was a young woman, she was coming back home from her cousin, who lived on the same street as her. As she was crossing the road near where it turns down her lonely dirt road, she heard a couple of men arguing. The sun hadn't gone down all the way, and she said it was still bright enough to see. She said she saw the two men yelling about something, and one of them pulled out a knife. The other man started to run from him, yelling not to do it. The man with the knife proceeded to chase him. He tackled the man not too far away and proceeded to stab him. The man fell, writhing in pain. The other man started to walk away from him, when all of a sudden, the man on the ground started turning into this beast. The other man ran into the surrounding woods as the beast man got up and sniffed the air. It howled something fierce before turning to look at Mama, and then it ran into the woods in chase of the man. Bullshit, chimed in Tony. That's a lie if ever I heard one. Mama don't lie, Renee said in defense. She has never lied to us. Besides, if you lived where I do, you'd be inclined to start believing in some of the things that go on out there. They got the voodoo out there. Witchcraft, vampires, ghosts, and things that will give you the heebie-jeebies. Quiet, the captain ordered. Keep your eyes peeled. We walked on in silence until we reached the outer perimeter of the cemetery. In the moonlight, we could see the old chapel-like structure. There were no lights on or any sound coming from the cemetery. Headstones lined the way up. Motioning us to take a defensive position, we found points of fire and waited. Captain wanted to see if the enemy was still around. After about 20 minutes of listening and watching, the captain decided to send someone up to check it out. I was volunteer. I was already on the side of the road the cemetery was on, and quickly made my way to the first headstone. Peeking over, I saw rows of gravestones and not much else. Slowly, I made my way through the forest of stones, keeping a desperate ear out for sounds of anything. After a bit, I was close enough to the church house to notice nothing was there. As I crossed the open field towards the church house, I noticed one of the graves had been dug up. A big hole was where there should have been dirt. I kept on moving till I reached the church. From what I could see in the moonlight, it was small. There was the wide open door leading in. On either side of the door were windows. Peeking in, I saw moonlight coming in. There was a hole in the roof. Besides a few broken chairs and debris from the roof, the church was completely empty. The back of the church had a single window at the center. I could tell the window still had glass. Checking around the church, I noticed nothing else. On the other side was a forest. I went back a ways and motioned to the others that it was safe. I waited by the first set of headstones as the others came up. Everyone came rushing up to the church house as the captain asked for a report. Several of the boys were looking inside the church, while the others were looking out into the cemetery. Renee walked over to the dug-up grave and started to kick some dirt in. "What happened here?" he said. "Dunno," I replied. "It was like that when I walked up here." Whatever they was doing, they seemed to have left in a hurry. As I watched him kick some more dirt in, he looked up at the sky. "Pretty, isn't it?" he asked. "See the moon rising?" Before he could finish, shots started ringing out. I saw Rene get hit twice and fall into the open grave. We all took cover and started shooting back. Muzzle flash was coming from the tree line. We started hearing German voices, and the captain quickly started issuing orders. A grenade went off somewhere, and we all took cover. The captain orders us into the church house to take up defensive positions. As we all ran inside, the Germans were yelling out something, and the muzzle flash started to get closer to us. Bullets and broken glass were raining down on us. Eugene and Donald tossed a couple of grenades out the front windows as Michael and myself got the front doors shut. We put a few of the broken chairs in front of it to hinder the enemy trying to enter in that way. We were all panicking as the barrage of bullets were seemingly overwhelming us. The first screams came right outside the door. The German soldiers that were outside the church door started screaming and shouting at something outside. That was quickly followed by the other Germans shooting at something that wasn't us. Soon we heard yelling and screaming as gunfire was being shot all around us. We looked at each other with frightened, confused looks on our faces. The shooting suddenly stopped, as did the screams and shouting. We listened for a few seconds for any sort of noise or sign that someone was still out there. A body jumped through the window as we all reacted and pointed our weapons at it. It was a German soldier. He was bloody and looked like he'd been attacked by something. The captain quickly went over to him and picked him up by his collar to his feet. "What's going on, damn it?" he yelled at the German. The soldier looked visibly frightened and was shaking. The captain yelled the same words at the boy again. "Wadlik, get over here. Tudor and Caprice, watch those windows. Cardinal, watch that back window." Donald went over to the captain. "Ask this piece of shit what the fuck they were shooting at out there," Captain ordered. Donald told the man in German. The soldier looked back at Watlick and said only one word. "Wo bist ihr?" "What the fuck did he say?" Captain demanded. Donald turned to him with a confused expression. "He said, wolf beast." "Wolf beast?" Captain said in a confused tone. "Fuck," Johnny exclaimed. "Did he just say wolf?" He didn't get to finish his sentence as something grabbed him and tried to pull him out of the window. He screamed, holding onto the window beam as we rushed to help him. Something had a hold of Johnny's legs as we tried to pull him back in. He was begging us not to let him go, as his grip was slowly being pulled away from the beam. I went to the side of the window and stuck my rifle out. Something grabbed a hold of it, trying to pull it out. I reached for my pistol and fired blindly outside. Nothing happened. I then peeked out. Looking back at me were two orange eyes inside of the head of what I can only describe as a huge wolf. Its teeth, I remember, were stained in blood, as was its mouth. I let go of the rifle and jumped back in horror, yelling, "What the fuck was that thing?" In one swift pull, poor Johnny was yanked out of the window, his screams now blood-curdling. Everybody backed away from the windows. Johnny continued to scream for a few seconds before it abruptly stopped. We all stared at the windows before the captain shouted, "Oh fuck, the prisoner!" We all turned, expecting not to see him there. Instead, not only was he there, in a corner, but he was shaking profusely and crying. He was, for the lack of a better phrase, scared shitless. Tony goes over to secure him as the rest of us take up defensive positions. We're staring at the windows now. Michael sets his BAR up, pointing to the back window. Myself and Eugene each have our rifles pointed at the front window. Donald has his pointed at the door. Rizzo and the captain are at the center of the room. "Wadlick, where's the radio?" Captain calls out. "Sorry, sir. I dropped it during the gunfight outside," he said.
"Oh, son of a bitch, Wadlick. Do you know where?"
"Not far from the door here, sir," he replied. We all tensed up as we knew what was coming next.
"Someone has to go out there and get it,"
Captain said. Audible fucks were said as we didn't want to venture outside of the church. As it turned out, we didn't have to. The radio came flying through the window, destroyed. A loud howl rang out. The thing bashed into the door that we'd reinforced with debris from the church. Donald backed up a bit more before firing a couple of shots through the door. We heard it run around the church. Michael started firing a few rounds while cursing. Eugene and I started firing as it ran past the windows. It again bashed into the door. The door gave way a bit. Rizzo and Donald ran to it and tried to reinforce it again. Once again the beast bashed into it, pushing it a little further open. I ran over to help them, and together we managed to get it pushed closed before it bashed into it again. Tony ran over to the window and started firing in that direction before retreating from it. A growl was heard from the door, and it started to run around the church again. We all took our positions again, waiting for it to attack once more. Michael let off a few more rounds as it passed his window, and then it got quiet. It didn't last long, but during that very brief moment, I was really on edge. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Johnny's body came flying in through the window. He landed a couple of feet from me. Rizzo ran and dragged him to the center of the room, checking him for signs of life. "He's still breathing, you guys," he said. Captain knelt down and checked on him.
"Oh, he's messed up pretty good,"
he said, to no one in particular.
"The son of the bitch out there cut him real bad. We need to get him back to HQ or he ain't gonna make it."
For the rest of the night, the beast would bash the door and then run around the church. I noticed it first that dawn was approaching. I let everyone know, and we all just stared at the window. The beast was right there in front of it. We all saw it, its matted, blood-soaked fur, orange glowing eyes, bare stained teeth. It let out this most awful howl before retreating. We heard it scream as if it were in pain, before it fell silent. No one moved. We all had our ears on high alert, listening for any sound. None came. I was volunteered to go check outside once the sun was out and shining. I did it hesitantly. Rizzo and Tony removed the debris from the door as Eugene secured the prisoner. Once the debris was removed, I gave the signal to open the door. As soon as it opened, I ran out, not knowing what to expect. What I saw was sure not what I'd expected. Blood, guts, and body parts scattered the front of the church as well as the cemetery. It was the kind of carnage that I'd only previously seen on the beach. That thing tore apart every German soldier out there that night. As I was comprehending what it was I was looking at, I heard the rumbling of a tank approaching. I ran back into the church and let the captain know. We all took up defensive positions, not knowing if they were friendly or the enemy. I had never felt so happy when a Sherman came into view. We all stood up as our boys came into the cemetery, setting up a defensive perimeter. The captain went up to his superior as the rest of us walked over to the Sherman. A few rows of jeeps lined up behind it. "Oh, you boys had a hell of a night," some private said as he walked by us. We were all tired and frankly just wanted to get the hell away from here. Johnny was carried out on a stretcher onto one of the jeeps. The prisoner was brought out as well. "Got a live one here," someone called out. We made our way over to the commotion when, to our surprise, Rene was brought out of the grave he'd fallen into when he was shot. I noticed right off the bat that his clothes were in tatters. He was barely clothed, in fact. It looked like he'd been attacked as well, but he had no scratches or any marks on him. On top of that, he looked like he hadn't been shot at all. There were no bullet wounds which I could see. Everyone else walked back to the Sherman, but I stayed. I was trying to rationalize what I was seeing. As Rene was being carried away past me, he opened his eyes, looking at me. He smiled and gave me a wink. And that was the story he told me as I remember it. He stated that no one else knows what went down that night besides his squad. He doesn't know what went into the official report that his captain made. He said that I could take it or leave it as it was, but that's what he remembers of that night. We talked a bit more before I said goodbye to him for the last time. He wished me well, and I went about my way. He passed away not long after. Makes you wonder just what the hell is really out there in this increasingly small world we have. I know one thing though. I will not be going near, around, or directly to any place in Louisiana anytime soon. So 3 stories for you tonight, either based on werewolves, witches, or werewolves and witches, and some combination of the two. Just thought it was a nice theme. Tried to cobble these all together. Now, you might have heard that last one before. In fact, you probably have. But I'm working on my remastering techniques, so some of the older vocals I'm not entirely happy with. I always keep them as just plain vocals without any background noise, so I thought I'd give it a bit of a tweak and make it a thematic video this evening for your Monday evening's entertainment. Well, there we go. That is enough for one evening, isn't it? But I'll be back again on Wednesday with, something else. That's about as far as I've planned ahead at the moment. So, yes, I'll be back again on Wednesday with something else for your listening. Anyway, yeah, getting carried away. All right, my dear friends, thanks for joining me, as ever. Back again soon. Till the next time, very, very sweet dreams. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.